Right now, at this very moment, we are watching the strongest storm signal that the long-range models have produced in over a decade. And I do not say that lightly. This is not me trying to hype up a random system for views. This is genuinely one of the most alarming pattern setups that meteorologists have seen in years. And it is happening in real time as we speak. If you have been following this channel for a while, you know I do not throw around words like historic unless the data actually backs it up. And today, right now, the data is backing it up in a big way. Let's get straight into it. Over the last several model cycles, both the European and the American models have locked onto an atmospheric pattern that is producing what is called an extreme blocking signal. In plain language, that means we have a massive area of high pressure that is essentially refusing to move, and it is going to act like a dam in the atmosphere over the next several days. When you get a block like this, sitting exactly where this one is sitting, it forces every disturbance coming through the jet stream to funnel into one very narrow corridor. And that corridor right now is lining up directly over an area that has not seen a signal this strong in more than 10 years. Here is why this matters so much. A blocking pattern by itself is not unusual. We see these throughout the year, but the strength of this particular block, combined with the placement of the jet stream running underneath it, is what has every single long-range model in agreement. And I want to stress that word, agreement, because these models almost never agree this early or this strongly. When the Euro, the GFS, and the Canadian model all converge on the same extreme outcome 5 to 7 days out, that is when you know something significant is brewing, and that is exactly what is happening right now as I am recording this. Let's talk about the actual storm signal itself, because this is where things get serious. The setup we are looking at is going to take an already potent system and funnel it directly through that narrow corridor I just mentioned, and in doing so, it is going to rapidly amplify in strength as it moves through the model. Guidance is showing pressure readings that, if they verify even close to what is being forecast right now, would rank among the lowest pressure readings we have seen from a system tracking through this region in the last decade. Lower pressure means a stronger storm, stronger winds, and a much more significant impact footprint. And right now, multiple independent model runs are converging on that same extreme low pressure solution. I want to walk you through the model comparison in detail because this is not just one model showing something crazy while the others disagree. This is genuinely unusual agreement across the board. The European model, which has historically had the best track record with these kinds of extreme pattern setups, has been consistently showing this exact scenario for the last 4 consecutive runs, and each run has actually trended slightly stronger rather than backing off, which is not something you typically see with a fluke signal. The American GFS model was a little slower to catch on, as it often is with longer-range extreme events, but its last 2 runs have now swung into close agreement with the European solution, and the convergence between the 2 major global models is a huge deal. The Canadian model, which tends to run a bit more aggressive on these features, is actually showing an even stronger version of this signal, with an even deeper pressure drop than either of the other 2. When we look at the ensemble members, which are essentially dozens of slightly varied versions of each model run designed to capture the range of possible outcomes, we are seeing something that stands out immediately. Normally, with a system this far out, you would expect a wide spread of outcomes across those ensemble members. Some weak, some moderate, some strong. Right now, the vast majority of ensemble members across all 3 major model families are clustering tightly around this extreme scenario. And that tight clustering this many days out is precisely what makes meteorologists sit up and pay attention, because it tells us the atmosphere is genuinely primed for this outcome rather than it being a random spike in one single model run. Now, let's talk about timing, because this is going to be critical for anyone in the potential path. Based on the current model consensus, this system is expected to rapidly develop and intensify over the next 3 to 4 days as it works its way through that blocking corridor, with the peak intensity and the most significant impacts likely arriving by the end of this week, or right at the very start of next week. I want to be upfront that a signal this far out can still shift in timing by 12 to 24 hours in either direction, but the overall window we are looking at has been remarkably consistent across the last several forecast cycles, which again speaks to just how locked in this pattern has become. As far as what this could actually mean on the ground, we are talking about the potential for widespread damaging winds, a significant severe weather threat ahead of and along the leading edge of the system, and depending on exactly how the moisture transport lines up, the possibility of extremely heavy rainfall in a fairly narrow but intense corridor. This is the kind of setup that historically has produced some of the more memorable, severe weather and wind events that we talk about on this channel. And the fact that we are seeing this kind of signal agreement this far in advance gives us a genuinely useful head start to get the word out and make sure people are prepared before this thing is bearing down on them with only a day or 2 of notice. I also want to address something important here. And that is the difference between a strong signal and a guaranteed outcome. Even with this level of model agreement, we are still several days out, and the atmosphere can, and sometimes does, throw curveballs that even the best models cannot fully anticipate. What I am telling you today is that the ingredients for a historic setup are lining up in a way we have not seen in roughly a decade, and that alone is worth taking seriously and preparing for. But I will be honest with you in every single update between now and when this system actually arrives, including if the signal weakens, or if it ends up being less extreme than what is currently being shown. For anyone who lives in or near the region that could be impacted by this corridor, now is genuinely the time to start thinking about your preparations. Not later this week, when the forecast becomes more certain, but the preparation window becomes much shorter. That means making sure you have a way to receive warnings even if the power goes out, securing anything outside your home that could become a projectile in damaging winds, having a plan for where you and your family will shelter if a warning is issued, and making sure your vehicle has fuel in case travel becomes necessary. These are the same basic steps I always recommend, but given the strength of this particular signal, I would not wait until the final day or two to get these things in order. Let's go back to the broader pattern for a moment, because understanding why this block is behaving the way it is helps explain why the signal is so unusually strong. This ridge of high pressure has been anchored in place by a combination of factors upstream, including a persistent trough pattern out over the eastern Pacific that has essentially been reinforcing this block day after day, rather than allowing it to break down and move like these features normally do. As long as that upstream pattern continues to reinforce the block, and right now the models are showing that reinforcement continuing right through the exact window. When our storm signal is expected to peak, we are going to keep seeing this kind of extreme agreement across the model guidance. I also want to mention that events like this tend to have ripple effects beyond just the primary window we are discussing today. Once a block this strong finally does break down, and it will eventually break down because these patterns do not last forever, there is often a secondary round of active weather that follows in its wake as the atmosphere tries to rebalance itself. So even beyond the primary system we are focused on this week, I would keep an eye on the medium-range outlook beyond that. Because a pattern this locked in typically does not just snap back to quiet conditions overnight once it finally relaxes. I want to take a moment on the historical comparison here, because when I say strongest signal in a decade, I want you to understand what that means. Over the last 10 years, there have only been a small handful of setups where every major global model converged this tightly on such an extreme outcome this many days out. Most of those prior events, when they verified, ended up producing some of the more significant regional weather stories of their respective years. That does not guarantee this event follows the same path, but it does mean a signal at this level of confidence deserves to be taken seriously rather than dismissed as model noise. I also want to break down the difference between what we call short-range certainty and long-range signal strength, because I think this distinction gets lost sometimes. When a storm is 12 to 24 hours away, we can usually tell you with a very high degree of confidence exactly where it is going and exactly how strong it will be, because the atmosphere at that point is essentially locked in. 5 to 7 days out, we are never going to have that same pinpoint accuracy, and anyone who tells you otherwise is not being honest with you. What we can do at this range is talk about pattern signals and probability, and what makes today's updates different is that the probability being shown across every major model right now is unusually high for something this far out. That is the entire reason I'm bringing this to you today, instead of waiting until it becomes a near certainty in 48 hours, because a head start of several extra days can make a massive difference in how prepared people are when this system actually arrives. Let's also talk briefly about the regional breakdown, because impacts are rarely uniform across an entire region. Areas closer to the core of the corridor are going to see the highest likelihood of extreme wind and severe weather impacts, while areas along the outer edges could still see meaningful impacts, just generally less extreme. As we get closer, we will be able to narrow this down significantly, but right now, if you are anywhere within a few hundred miles of that projected corridor, this is worth paying attention to rather than assuming you are far enough away to ignore it. One more piece I want to add is about communication during an event like this. If the signal continues to verify, local National Weather Service offices and emergency management agencies are going to ramp up their own messaging well before the event arrives, and I would strongly encourage you to follow those local accounts directly in addition to watching updates here. Channel updates like this one are great for the big picture pattern, but your local office will have the most specific, actionable information for your exact location once we get within that final 48 to 72 hour window. Now, switching gears for just a moment, our drunk NATO phone cases for both iPhone and Samsung are available right now over at shopmaxvelocity.net, and that link is also the top one in the description below if you want to grab one. Our 500,000 subscriber merchandise is also still up for a limited time before it goes away for good, so if you have had your eye on anything from that lineup, now is a good time to go check it out. Getting back to the forecast, I want to leave you with a clear sense of what to watch for over the next few days. Keep an eye on the overnight model runs, because with a signal this strong, we are looking for either continued agreement, which would essentially confirm this historic setup, or any sign of the models starting to diverge, which would tell us the atmosphere is finding a way to weaken this block earlier than currently expected. Either way, we will have a full update the moment new data comes in, and given how significant this potential setup is, there is a real chance we put out more than one update over the coming days as this continues to evolve. To summarize everything we have covered, we are watching a blocking pattern setup that multiple major global models agree is the strongest signal of its kind in roughly a decade, funneling an already potent disturbance through a narrow corridor and rapidly intensifying it in the process. The timing points toward the end of this week into early next week. The potential impacts include damaging winds, a significant severe weather threat, and locally extreme rainfall. And while there is still time for this to shift, the level of agreement across the models right now is about as strong of a red flag as you will see this far out. Make sure you are prepared, make sure you have a way to get warnings, and make sure you are checking back with us for updates as this situation continues to develop over the coming days. Thank you so much for watching. And if you are new here, make sure to subscribe down below so you do not miss any of these updates as this historic setup continues to take shape. We will see you in the next one.